Something bugging you? Come on in. Let's go for a drive. Hey, thanks for joining us for another What's Bugging You episode. I'm here with my friends, Kate and Josh. These guys are helping me co-host Summit online conference. And just in talking, Kate brought up an issue that I thought would be really good to do a little episode on. All right, so tell us about this conversation that you were having with your friend and kind of what's bugging you, bugging her, bugging this generation. Because I thought it was pretty cool. We can talk about it for a few minutes.
All right, love that. So yeah, about a week ago, chatting with one of my friends about Christian apologetics, what those are and how best to use them, and she brought up a concern about how Christian apologetics are used most specifically within the bounds of evangelism or related conversations. Her concern was that in that particular area, Christian apologetics are becoming obsolete and irrelevant because we live with a generation and in a culture that doesn't put much stock, A, in objective truth, and then B, the rock solid, super analytical arguments carry very little weight because that's just not how people interact, and they can feel very judgmental or very bigoted if you come across with this apologetic for what you believe.
Yeah.
And so her question was, how do we talk about our Christian faith in a culture that really no longer values the apologetic approach? That was kind of her question.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think about that.
That's cool. I like that you said it. I mean, when we evaluate this current culture, there is just a I don't know if lack of understanding, or there's just a lack of acknowledgement that there even is objective truth to begin with. And so when we say, well, this is true and here's the reasons why, well, we can't even get off the ground because, well, okay, that's your truth. So there's a misunderstanding of what it even means to have some sort of objective truth. There's this confusion, especially when it comes to moral claims or to religious claims. We often hear those kinds of claims and we treat them as if they are subjective kinds of claims. They're personal opinions, things that we make up ourselves. And so, of course, it would be hard to have a conversation about truth, about spiritual things, when we're talking on different levels.
Yeah.
And that would also make sense why, well, apologetics, giving reasons why something is objectively true, well, subjective truths don't need any reasons. So why are we talking about this if it's just your own personal truth because you make it true by believing it? So it seems like there's an underlying conversation to be had just with the nature of objective and subjective truth. I don't think that's necessarily what your friend is asking, but it's lying under the surface. And at least I've found in conversing with students that it's a helpful kind of conversation. And students are able to make this distinction. We do live in reality where there are objective truths. And so if we can get on the same level of talking, no, we're talking about a nature of something about reality, not just something I think or believe, that can be helpful. But I think where your friend is going and what she's noticing is coming from something really good. And that is the fact that the current generation is so relational. They care so deeply. Your generation cares so deeply for other people and so desires relationships that's actually a good thing compared to my generation and my parents' generation, where as my friend Dr. Kathy Cook says it, we've transitioned from having truth-based or belief-based relationships. So we form our relationships based around what we believe or what we've grown up to believe. That's the standard for being my friend. To now, because we're so connected and that we so deeply care, this generation has moved more to relationship-based beliefs. And so it's almost like the pendulum has swung from something good, noticing that, okay, my parents, they weren't friends with anybody like themselves, whereas Jesus was. There seems to be a disconnect. So to be a good Christian, it seems like we need to engage other people. But if we swing so far to say, well, the relationship is the top priority, and that should affect what we believe is true, well, there's a problem there too.
Yeah.
But coming from something good. Anyway, I've got some more thoughts on this as far as relationally connecting, that I think maybe that our approach needs to be balanced, it seems to me like, with truth and relationships. When I look at Jesus, seeing the fact that God desires a relationship and that God is the source of all truth, that the truth resides in a relationship, like, this is a really good thing and important balance to have. And if we've erred for so long in the apologetics world that is primarily made up of my generation and prior to me, has probably erred on that side of things, on the truth side, and neglected the relational side of things, whereas this generation has erred the other way. But to engage this generation, we have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
I don't know, you might have some thoughts on this, Josh, but I've got some ideas at least about how maybe we can approach the current generation.
Yeah. I think one thing about this generation, it's kind of in line with what you noted, Tripp, is, there's things about the generation where it's specifically about the way they engage Christianity or worldview, but it's just everywhere. I was reading a book called The Art of Storytelling, and what they were describing is that the world, and specifically our generation as a whole, thinks a lot more in stories. Like, even if you just watch business presentations or commercials or advertisements, before it was like, this are the reasons why my product is good. A, B, C. It does this, it does that. Nice. Whereas now, a lot of those have transitioned more into story form. Like, this is the story behind it, and this is how this story interacts with your actual experience. And I think what the problem is that a lot of our generation has seen and heard these truths, specifically people who may have been able to interact with Christianity or may have been able to interact with apologetics, and found it wanting because they aren't able to see how those objective truths fit into their own personal lives, and they aren't able to reconcile those things. This is what is God's ideal thing for marriage, but I came from a broken home. My father wasn't there, or my mother wasn't, the kind of person that she was supposed to be, or, God is supposed to be all good and all loving, but I haven't experienced His presence. Why don't I feel His love? Or, I know this is supposedly the biblical standard for sin, but, I have these feelings. Like, why would God give these feelings to me if I'm not supposed to act on them in this way? And it's just, you have all of these truths, and people can say things, but it's really hard for people to feel cared about if you aren't willing to take the time to show how those truths actually engage and interact with their story. And a lot of times, I think one of the problems with apologetics, or at least one of the problems why people perceive apologetics that way, is because they feel like it's detached. I know that a lot of the criticism of philosophy, or a lot of the criticism of, people thinking deeply, right, religion or ideas, is like, why does that matter? That's just a belief that you have. If that's just in your own head, you have yours, I have mine. We think what we think. And the reason why they say that is because they don't actually think that those things have any bearing on the way their life actually has, or way the life has gone, or the way their life is, because they haven't been shown that.
Yeah. Oh, dude, that's so good, and that's kind of where I was going. You went with story. But Kate, is this kind of resonating with the conversation that you guys were having?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I can add something here. When you're talking about detached, well, actually, maybe, do you want to say what you were going to say first, and then?
Well, maybe. Depends on what you're going to say. I don't know. Just this connection with story. All right. So first off, I have a friend, Dr. Paul Gould, who I'll be having on an episode soon to talk about something similar to this. He just recently wrote a book, however, called A Good and True Story. And so the connection is, I think that traditional apologetics have detached, as you use that word, the propositional truths of Christianity from the story of Christianity. When we understand that It is not just individual segmented truths, but it is Christianity itself is true, and Christianity itself is a story of the way the world is. It's a story of reality, of how all things began, of how all things will end, and everything in between, which is the subtitle of a book another friend of mine wrote, Greg Kokel, called The Story of Reality. I'm trading on some of these ideas, but when we see that Christianity is a story of reality, we can begin to see that our story is a part of a larger story, and that allows us to relationally connect, especially when we see that the story of reality involves a relationship with the creator of reality, and we have an opportunity to have this relationship that we were designed to have. Well, that connects with us on a relational level. This, I think, doesn't just connect with this current generation, but it shows us that Christianity is meaningful. It's actually desirable. I think it was Blaise Pascal who once said, and he even noticed in his time, that it might be that we need to first show mankind that Christianity is desirable and then demonstrate that it is true. So we become attracted to it because we know we need to be involved in a bigger story, relationally connected, because we were designed in that way. What if the story of reality does account for those longings? Well, in fact, it does, and maybe this is where apologetics come into play. Maybe we've jumped the gun and gone there first. So, I don't know. Any closing thoughts on that? And then this was a really cool conversation to have already, and we could keep going from there. But
Yeah.
closing thoughts. Okay.
Closing thoughts. Well, I do think that oftentimes truth has to come in relationship, but truth isn't detached in the sense that historically truth has always existed in Trinity. Not just God, that's not what I'm talking about, but truth goes hand in hand with goodness and beauty. And those are three parts of the same entity in a sense. And so truth may be a much harder pill for people to swallow nowadays with the idea of subjectivity and personal versus public and all of that kind of stuff. But if you look at the culture that we live in, there is an even more apparent hungering, in my opinion, for goodness and for beauty. You can see that. So for instance, my church has a very active homeless relief program. And the people that come through that program are given all kinds of help, whether that's medical or counseling, clothing, food, whatever it is. They can come and receive relief for what they're going through. And that goodness has opened more doors relationally than an apologetics program from our church probably ever could, at least at that level. And so watching them say, okay, what you have to say, again, it's not desirable to me yet. I don't care whether it's true or what, but you have been so kind in a way that the world isn't kind to me, that I am more interested to hear what you have to say, because the goodness was what I longed for even more, even before I knew to long for the truth.
Yeah.
And so I think going into a world that's lonely and suffering and feels detached and isolated, to go in with the hands and feet of Christ first and say, I'm going to show you goodness and beauty, knowing that that's not divorced from truth, and to bring you into that Trinity in one way, that Trinity of truth, goodness, and beauty. The truth part's going to come as well.
Yeah.
But
well, okay,
later.
Isn't this kind of how Jesus gets us anyway? He put on flesh to engage us, to bring us into a relationship with him, and as he does, he opens our eyes to see the truth for what it really is, which ultimately resides in him, the person of truth. Crazy. Okay, cool. This was so fun, and it's amazing how the gospel speaks to all of this. It's almost as if it is true.
Yeah, almost.
Cool. Thank you guys for joining us today on What's Bugging You. I hope to do this again with you guys. This is fun.
Yeah, it is.
All right. See you guys.